Right, guys, I think we'll make a start because we don't want this to take too long, but it's an important meeting that we want to do. Um, I'm going to, in a moment, hand over to Chris, and he will just talk us through and remind us of how universities in the UK and elsewhere assess and test against plagiarism and bad academic practice. I just want to say a very simple introduction before to do it. I'm, if you like, playing the bad cop, and then Chris is going to be the student's friend and help people to understand and to get around the situation. Um, when we first started the MSc in Oman, I asked a number of people who were going to be amongst the first cohort of students um, to write a simple piece of writing, and it was just a kind of a test, really. It wasn't an assignment in any sense. It was just a simple test to see how familiar they would be in writing English up to about between, I think, 5 to 750 words is what we asked for, on a simple question. Um, when I received the text from a number of them, uh, they were so obviously not written by them. And because I know each of you very well, and I know how you write English and so on, I'm able to tell when someone is writing in their own words and when someone has stopped writing in their own words and is just using large chunks of somebody else's words. I can tell it because of the style of the English and the tone of the English. It's not difficult reading in your own language to pick up these things. So I asked people what had happened, and in this case, what they said to me, what I found out was that they had been advised or had been offered by a relatively senior person to say, look, don't waste your time writing these essays. Don't waste your time doing that. Just find a company, or we'll find you some people who'll write it for you, and then you just submit that. So we made it abundantly clear to those people right at the start, if you ever do that again, you will be immediately thrown off the master's course. And indeed, any UK university worth its name would do the same. And the message got through, and people started to write their essays. And throughout that particular cohort, we never had a problem. And it was good. It all worked well. Now, what's happened here in this particular CPD is we have seen at least one or more evidences of very, very high scores on the Turnitin. Now, what I mean by that is that when we ask you to submit your essay into the university system, you have to submit it using this program called Turnitin. Turnitin is an internationally used program. It's not just used by Bournemouth. Every UK university uses Turnitin, and many other universities overseas. And the aim of Turnitin is to compare your text, the text of your essay, with a huge collection of known publications, essays, theses, and so on. So it can tell us whether or not you have taken maybe a sentence or two or a paragraph or two from a particular publication. And a typical score, because in many cases it's difficult to write in different words what the author has written. So sometimes it's quite normal to say fairly similar words to what the author said. And that's understood. And so scores of between 20-25% on Turnitin are up to then is about acceptable. Anything from 30% onwards is unacceptable, and universities immediately trigger that the person marking the essay and the people running the assignment should now go to some very strict procedures run by the university. And the reason why we are having this session this afternoon is because one of the essays that was submitted for CPD2 on this occasion scored 75% on Turnitin. And that is one of the highest scores I've ever seen that Turnitin has ever picked up on. So I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to explain how Turnitin works, why we know what we know, and so on. And then he will explain what's going to have to happen. But I want to take this opportunity to basically explain to each of you I know you very well. We've worked together for many months, and you know that I want you guys to succeed. But you must know that anything that any score of Turnitin which comes up with that kind of score, we cannot accept. And indeed, we would normally go straight to expulsion from the course. So it's what we should do. We really should go through some very, very strict procedures. Now, so that's the bad news. I'm going to hand over to Chris now, who's going to show you just what Turnitin can do. You click on that one there, and they can see the screen. That one there. And he will show you on the screen here what we see when we look at Turnitin. Here we go.
All right, hi everyone. I hope you can all hear me clearly. So just to pick up where Richard left off, there's two types of things that we're looking for when we're reading your essays in terms of academic irregularity or plagiarism. The first is what we call bad academic practice. So bad academic practice is simply where a student has maybe unknowingly or they've made a mistake in terms of they've copied and pasted some text and they've put it into their essay, but they haven't attributed it to the actual source from which they've got it from, right? So we can see here in terms of this essay that was submitted to a different university on a different topic, but you can see how the Turnitin system is able to pick up the pieces of writing that have been copied and pasted, and then tell us the actual source from which the work has been taken. So you can see we get this report here. The number one is quite clear. We can see throughout this essay that there are various points where this student has taken this text from the same essay, or from the same source. So as we scroll down, we can see everything that's a number one, right? So we can clearly see how the Turnitin system is able to pick this up. If we go down to the bottom of the essay, all the way down, sorry, this is a little bit slow. Right, we get down to the bottom. We can see it's primarily taken from source number one, and we get a little report at the end here which shows to us that it was that the majority of this essay was taken from another student's essay, right, 56% of it. But you can also see that there are other sources that the student has taken to construct this essay. And this is the kind of report we get for all of your essays, yeah, for every single one, all of the ones that, whether they're perfectly written or whether there's problems with them. And in this instance, what the student has done is that they've taken from these different sources, but they haven't quoted them. If we look at the reference list, right, there's no reference to any of those sources that we see. Sorry, this is, Richard, help me out with this. Let's just, what do you want to do? Just go up to the reference list. Okay, yeah, so we can see on the reference list that none of the sources that are in the Turnitin report are attributed. So, this can be one of two things. As I said, it can either be bad academic practice, where a student has taken something from another source and put it in their essay without properly referencing it, right? And for us, that's bad, right? If you do that, you're liable to get a very low mark and be asked to complete the work again. Now, the second type of thing that we're looking for is plagiarism, right? This is where a student intentionally tries to deceive the staff that are marking their essay. Now, it could be also construed in this instance that this student, because they've taken 56% from another student's essay and tried to pass it off as their own, has actually plagiarized. So it comes down to a decision that we, as the markers of the work, are allowed to have to make as to what we think has gone on. Do we think it's a case of bad academic practice, or do we think that you're actually intentionally trying to deceive us when you're submitting your essays? At this point in time, looking at the work that we have seen submitted for CPD3, my inclination is to give the benefit of the doubt and to say that even though we've seen some very high Turnitin scores, that it's a case of bad academic practice. It's maybe that some of you have gone away, you've read some sources on the internet, you've copied and pasted, and you've not attributed or referenced that actual internet source as the place where you got the information from, right? Which would mean, and for those of you that have done that in certain instances, you'll be aware of it because you'd have received a fail grade and you'll be asked to retake the work moving forward. But this session is also a warning to you guys, right? That if this kind of thing happens again moving forward after this meeting, then it's going to be a case of you've been warned about it now very clearly. We warn you at the very start of the course. There's lots and lots of information when you take CPD1 on the libraries and what is plagiarism and what isn't plagiarism. Moving forward, if we see this kind of thing happening again, where work is taken from other sources and isn't attributed correctly, then the next step for us will be that for the students that engage in that kind of practice, that you would potentially be put forward for what we call an academic irregularity meeting, and then we would be pushing for to put it forward as a case of plagiarism, because you've been warned now as to what is appropriate and acceptable and what is not. So I'll hand back over to Richard now, just to some final comments, I guess, on the session.
Okay, so we hate having these sorts of meetings, and we really hope this will never have to talk about this subject again. But as we've got this moment, if anybody wants to ask any questions about what we're saying, if there's any lack of clarity about what either Chris or I have said, please feel free to ask questions. If you've got individual issues or comments, then feel free to email us and we'll talk to you or do online GoToMeeting tutorials with you individually. But rather than dragging up individual cases now, I don't think that would be appropriate because everyone else is here. And this is not affecting everybody anyway. It's only affecting a couple of people. So can we just ask, are there any areas that anybody wants further clarification, or are you happy that we've made the case clear?
Hi, Richard. Yeah, it's clear now, but I just have one question, because sometimes when we get an article, it says, because what I remember in the first meeting, we said we just have to write the last name and the year of publication. But at the end, when you want to write in bibliography and you go and search for it, you don't find that article. You just find few sentences which is related to it. So what can I do in that case?
I think that, so can I just be clear, Sakina, what were you saying? So maybe you've read a resource on the internet and they're quoting somebody that's talking about a particular issue or topic, but you can't find the actual reference that they've used to write that. Is that what you're saying, or are you saying something different?
Yeah, for example, like, because we don't write it at once, we write it gradually.
Yeah.
So I do save some articles which were like a reference for me. But when I want to cross-check on the internet, when I write the name of the person, for example, let's say if I took something from David Alexander book.
Yeah.
So ideally we write Alexander and the year. But for some articles, though they are internationally publication done, when I write the last name and the year, I get something completely different than what I have found it for the first time when I have found the materials I'm looking for. So that was like I have to go and search and search and search, and so many times happened that I couldn't find it, exactly that reference. And I have written already from it, like I took lots of ideas from that reference in my assignments. So what can I do at that time?
I think what you need to be, so there's two types of referencing that you're doing here, right? The first is that you're taking an argument that you found and you're re-articulating it in your own words. In that instance, it's fine just when you re-articulate it in your own words, it's fine to just, as you would do normally, put the name of the author in brackets with the date. If you're obviously taking a more direct quote from that resource, then I would advise moving forward that you clearly note down the exact quote itself. You put it in quotation marks, and you clearly note the author, the date, and the page number, so that you know, it's a case of how you go about doing your research is to make sure you keep track of everything that you're doing moving forward. The issue that we've seen in terms of stuff that people have submitted, though, it isn't really there what you're describing there. It's where people have copied and pasted something from an internet source that maybe has 2 or 3 references to academic research, and then put that into their essay and into their bibliography, and it's quite clear that they've not written that themselves. So that's more what we're concerned with than the kind of what you're describing in terms of your practice.
And just, Sakina, just to add to that, it is a very practical thing. When you're reading and preparing for your essay writing, and you spot something in David Alexander that you think, that's really good, I'm going to use that. At that stage, it's a useful discipline to actually keep a notebook of all these bits that you're going to use for your essay, and write down clearly what the reference is, you know, literally to the page number, so you can look it up again. Because as you read through lots of texts, you will find certain things you want to come back to. And it's good to sort of identify it in a notebook where you find those particular references. Okay.
Okay, I think it's clear. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Case, Hamid, Haitham, Ahmed. Any other questions you want to ask? Hamid, your microphone is unmuted. Do you want to say something? Ask any question?
No. No, it's clear for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, Hamid, that's fine.
Yeah.
All right.
I just want to say one other thing to everyone else. Don't as a result of this discussion suddenly think or be concerned about how you're going about reference. The point is that when we ask you to reference and to write things, that you can quote extensively from Alexander or the other disaster management scholars, right? That we're not saying that you shouldn't be doing that, and it is possible to have an essay with a relatively high Turnitin score that may occasionally go above 30. But in those instances where we see something go above 30 and it's acceptable, it's where we can see that the student has clearly, quoted academic material, quoted an internet source, they put it in quotation marks, and we can see the source that they've got it from. You know, the amount of times we see a student say submit something where they've lifted something from Wikipedia and then or another internet resource and not attributed it. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're concerned with here, and that's what we've seen happen with a lot of the work that was submitted for CPD 3, and that's what we're trying to stop or trying to prevent moving forward. Right? It's perfectly acceptable to use lots of good references and lots of quotes in your essay writing. But the key point, as Richard said, is you have to make sure you attribute it to every resource that you use.